Welcome to Recovery Comes Home Radio, your go-to podcast for all things related to addiction recovery. Whether you are an individual in recovery, a concerned loved one, or a dedicated professional, this podcast is tailored just for you. Here we are all about empowering you with the tools, insights, and inspiration you need to move forward. So grab your headphones, tune in, and let's embark on this transformative journey together. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Recovery Comes Home Radio, the podcast where healing takes center stage. I'm Adrienne, your host, and we're here to bridge the gap between industries, the people in recovery, their families, and industry professionals, fostering a supportive community dedicated to the journey of healing from and overcoming addiction. From personal anecdotes to professional guidance, we're here to empower you to navigate the challenges and celebrate the many victories on this collective journey of recovery. So buckle up for a transformative ride as we navigate the intricate threads of addiction recovery. So I'd like to personally thank and welcome our guest today, Duncan Bhaskaran Brown. Did I get that right, Duncan?
That was pretty good. It was a pretty good effort. Duncan Bhaskaran Brown.
So you guys know Duncan, right? I'm going to tell you a little bit about this guy. He's done his fair share of overindulgence. Strictly speaking, he's drunk more than his fair share of wine and eating more than his fair share of cake. Along the way, he found himself in some interesting places, like on stage with the S Club, a stint as mayor of his hometown, and Morris dancing in Westminster Abbey. Now, after 20 years of overdoing it, he cleaned up his act and trained with the Easy Way Clinic, world's most successful stop smoking service. Now he spends his time helping people push overindulgence out of their life. Duncan, it's so great to have you. I'm so excited. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about your recovery journey?
Yeah, for sure. I'm really looking forward to it too. So, yeah, like the intro says, I spent 20 years not making the wisest choices in life. And in the last 8.5 years since I got sober, I've done a little bit better. I've done some studying, done some training, found out a few things, got a little bit obsessed with sobriety, the usual. So, yeah, shall I let everyone into how I got into it all?
I think so. Yeah. Like, how did you start out? What was going on in your life at that time and what happened?
Yeah, so for me, I think it started pretty young. I remember one occasion at school, and my teacher at the time asked us to write a poem. And I did. I wrote this little poem. And I don't think it was a bad poem. I think I used what I now know was alliteration and dissonance and metaphor. I think is not entirely bad for a 9-year-old. And I took it up to the front. I showed the teacher, and the teacher took one look at it and went, "Your handwriting's a bit scruffy and you haven't used enough commas and I can barely read that word. Your spelling's atrocious." So I pointed out that thought actually writing was more about what you convey, the message that you got across, the elegance of the words themselves that you used, rather than simply your handwriting and your punctuation and your spelling. And the teacher said, "See me after school, Duncan." And that pretty much sums up my entire career at school. I just didn't really fit in. I had certain expectations. I thought certain things should work some ways, and my teachers generally disagreed. So I found it quite hard to find a place and to find anything that offered me a kind of like reward for being who I was, any kind of validation of myself. So I don't know, I did the next best thing, which was just burying my head into chocolate and cookies and candy and all of that sort of stuff. And, at the time, nobody really batted an eyelid. But looking back on it now, I clearly had a very unhealthy relationship with food. And that sort of ticked along for a little bit. But yeah, I hit my mid-teens, discovered alcohol, realized that was a much bigger hammer to knock in that particular nail. So started drinking, and with that came the smoking and the taking drugs and listening to questionable music.
How long did that take you, let's say before you took your first drink, to where you felt like maybe this was something that was getting out of control?
Yeah, so it was just over 20 years, I think. So, well, that was the point where it kind of came to a head, and I realized I really needed to do something about it. I think something else that was very instrumental for me was one of my good friends who I met at university. He died at the age of 27, and that was from acute pancreatitis, which was absolutely related to the amount he was drinking. And that was a very pivotal point for me. I mean, I didn't stop drinking at that point, but I think I remember like the train ride home from his funeral, and it was kind of, it felt very balanced. It was going to go one of two ways. It was either just going to go completely crazy, or I was going to sort of begrudgingly admit that I was going to live in the real world. And whilst I didn't like actually do very much about it at the time, I think that was when I made the decision that I knew something needed to change. I just didn't want to change it right then.
Okay, so then can you describe some of the barriers, if you can remember back there? You knew it was behavior that probably needed to change, but you just didn't want to change it right then.
Yeah. So I guess what got in the way was I just couldn't see another way. I couldn't see a way to make my life work without it. I'd been drinking and smoking and eating rubbish for so long that I just did not know any other way to live. And I didn't really have any great role models or examples. I couldn't look at somebody and point at somebody and go, somebody who drinks not at all and lives a healthy life. And like, literally none of my friends were doing it. I'd surrounded myself with heavy drinkers, as you do, because it just makes you feel better, doesn't it?
Yeah. Nobody likes to drink a whole lot and somebody's over there just sipping on their drink. It doesn't make people feel comfortable.
Yeah, I always thought people like that were boring, and now I have some friends who are exactly like that.
Yes,
actually quite interesting once you get to know them. Weird life, isn't it? So yeah, I mean, I guess I was doing a lot of writing. I wrote a lot in my 20s and not so much in my 30s, but I wrote a lot in my 20s, and that was all. I had a head full of Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it's what writers did, obviously. Write drunk, edit sober. That was always the mantra.
I've never heard that before. Write drunk, edit sober.
Yeah, that was Hemingway. Yeah, I followed that advice. I was never only good at editing.
Yeah, because I got that one. So describe to me some of the challenges that you faced when getting help.
So, I mean, I think I was very lucky in a lot of respects because, I mean, I was in a committed relationship. I had a very supportive wife, and that in general made everything a lot easier because I was starting from quite a good place. But when I stopped drinking initially, it felt a lot better. I mean, who knew? Not poisoning yourself all of the time.
Right.
So I had that kind of initial burst of
poisoning
energy.
Yourself in all of those ways that you mentioned. That's a good point to pick up, is that it wasn't just the drinking, it's the rubbish that you're putting in your body. It's the way in general that you are treating this physical vessel that you have.
Yeah. And I stopped smoking and I stopped taking drugs shortly after I stopped smoking. And then about 2 years after that was when I stopped drinking. And then about 2 years after that was when I stopped really eating junk food and I embraced a much healthier life. And each time it was like, wow, I feel better. And it was transformative. But I think the thing with stopping drinking was invariably I was running away from a lot of things. I was running away from the fact that I wasn't really fulfilled with what I was doing with my life. I wasn't the husband that my wife needed. I wasn't doing important work. And I was emotionally fairly stunted, and I'm blaming alcohol for that one. I was running away from all of that stuff, and drinking didn't help. No. But when I stopped drinking, it meant I did have to kind of stand in front of it a bit more. And what I realized was a lot of what I thought were big problems turned out not to be so big. It took work. I had to actually do things. I couldn't just like grab a book and a bottle and pretend that the world didn't exist.
Right. When you were navigating the process, you spoke a little bit about the support of your wife. How did you navigate the process of reaching out for help?
So I stopped smoking by reading Alan Carr's The Easy Way to Stop Smoking. And I read that the first time in my early 20s, and I did stop smoking for about a year. And then I went to a party and somebody was passing around a spliff, a marijuana cigarette, And at that point, I'd still been smoking a bit of marijuana on and off, but I had been very careful about not mixing it with tobacco. And of course, it was a party and somebody was passing around his joint. And you can't exactly turn around to them and go, do you mind re-rolling that without tobacco in it? So I ended up just smoking it. And I managed to get myself very heavily re-addicted to nicotine. But I didn't tell my brain that for a while. I didn't admit that I was smoking again. I just smoked a lot of joints, which is not a great 20 a day when you're talking about joints, not a good idea. That book had been very effective for me for that year until I did something kind of stupid. So when I wanted to stop smoking again, I literally went to my bookshelf, picked the book back up, read the book, stopped smoking, never had an issue, never even wanted another cigarette. So when I finally got to the decision that it was time to stop smoking and stop drinking, I kind of at the back of my mind vaguely remembered that Alan had written a book about alcohol. So I went on Amazon and got that. So in terms of actually reaching out, it was smooth. It was one-click Amazon, kind of just press the button. And that, I think, really worked for me because it meant I didn't have to sort of stand in front of anybody and tell them that I had a problem. I could deal with it my own way. But the book was
discreet.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've got a lot of respect for all of the group programs out there, but I'm not sure any of them would really have worked that well for me. I mean, that's a bit of a moot point these days, isn't it? But
you know what? I don't know, because you know what, Duncan? When someone thinks addict alcoholic, they first think AA, 12 steps, whatever, right? I'm
probably a bit more smart recovery. But that, I'm not sure whether that would have actually worked for me. I don't know. I mean, I guess at the time I did want to change. I needed to do something. So I don't know. Sometimes you meet people and they are so desperate for change, you could almost give them a copy of the phone book and just tell them it's all right. And, that was kind of me.
And so, we need to make sure that recovery includes people like you as well, right? Yeah. We don't need to go to our mind to the rock bottom alcoholic or addict. And by the way, they don't look like the bum in the street anymore. They look like you and me.
Yeah. I mean, I mostly these days work with people who are professionals, who have jobs, successful jobs, generally.
Absolutely.
They're really, from the outside, they look like they're really doing
got it together, put it together, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I was exactly the same. I looked like it was all going smoothly. I was mayor of my hometown, for God's sake.
Yeah. Look at my accomplishments, right? Look at my accomplishments. But inside, there's that void.
Absolutely. And it only looked good. It didn't feel good.
Yeah. Are there any specific resources or information that you found particularly valuable? Tell me a little bit about the process that book walks you through.
So Alan Carr, an amazing guy. And a lot of people say it's very similar to NLP or it's very similar to cognitive behavior stuff. And some of the similarities are there, and you can see why people say that. But Alan was not trained or aware of CBT or NLP when he wrote the book. So, actually, he developed the sessions first, but from that when he wrote the book. So it's got a lot of similarities to cognitive behavior therapy. They tend to call it cognitive realignment. What I think it does is it takes your beliefs about drinking, smoking, eating junk food, whatever it is, and changes those from usually false, fairly unhelpful beliefs to what you might argue is the truth, what you might just argue is a better way of thinking about it and looking at it. And once you no longer believe that it's serving you, once you no longer believe it's helping you at all, then why would you do it? And I think he's very good at making the analogy between anything and heroin, because most of the people that come through the Easy Way Clinic, it's a big red line. Even the ones that do drugs, they're like, oh, I wouldn't do heroin. You must be joking.
Right. They've got a line, right? They've got a line. They have a line in the sand.
Exactly. I've done pretty much everything, but even I would like, oh no, I'm not going to do heroin. Anywho's, he's very good at making that and sort of making analogies and saying, well, look, you don't want to have heroin, so you don't require willpower to not have heroin. So if you could make alcohol or cigarettes the same, you could make your reaction to them the same as your reaction to heroin, then you wouldn't have to use any willpower not to have them because you just simply wouldn't want them. Annie Grace, This Naked Mind, she built on that a lot. And she quotes Paul Tillich all the time: without desire, there is no temptation.
Right. And what a wonderful way to think about that is that just shift your perspective. I know that this conversation is so important in today's day and age because we still, as a society, think of addicts and alcoholics as the bum in the street. And we have people who literally are your age and their families are leaving them because they can't stop playing Call of Duty.
Yeah.
They have created a whole nother life and a whole nother family with the people in the basement.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there was a story about a Korean couple whose child died of malnutrition because they were playing an online multiplayer immersive game. And the irony of it is that game is one of those Second Life things where you go and build yourself for life. And they spent so much time online building that
life.
Yeah, that they actually ignored the real world with tragic consequences. And I mean, absolutely, I think they talk a lot about dopaminergic environments, but like Facebook, they learned everything they ever knew off Vegas, didn't they? I mean,
they did.
They're very deliberate about it. They are trying to trap you.
Yes,
that is what they are trying to do. And the alcohol,
and there's substitutions going on, right? So you drop the drugs and you pick up the alcohol, or you drop the alcohol and you pick up the gaming, or you pick up the shopping, or you pick up the eating.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That was what I did. I mean, I stopped drinking and then I sort of gave myself this pass that, well, I don't drink now. I can eat whatever I like. And when I was drinking, I never ate sweet things. But when I stopped drinking, because I was allowed to eat whatever I wanted to, I very much discovered ice cream and triple chocolate Belgium cookies kind of thing, and
bonbons and whatever you can shove into your mouth, right?
And then literally I remember like it was yesterday, sitting in the room. My daughter was very, very young at the time. She was about 8 or 9 months old. My wife was very ill, so I was looking after her on my own. It was very stressful, as you can imagine. And I'm sitting there eating this overly sugary cookie, just hated it. But I felt like I had to eat it and I had to have them. I had to make sure I got to the supermarket so I could get something like that so I'd be all right for the evening. And it just like...
That's the thought pattern of a drug addict.
Exactly. I mean, there was this light that kind of shined down to me and just went, Duncan, you are eating the way you used to drink. And it's like, oh, yeah, so I am. So it was like, well, let's dig out all of the stuff that I did to stop drinking and smoking and let's change up the diet. And I am almost exclusively whole food plant-based these days and I feel a lot better for it.
Yes, right. Your body starts being kind to you when you're kind to it. The thing that cracks me up a lot is that, let's say someone comes in off of an addiction or alcoholism, and then they are so particular about what they put in their body. And it's like 6 months ago, you would have put the kitchen sink in there.
Yeah, I would have drunk whatever
the Drano, it doesn't matter. You would, if it said maybe it had alcohol in it, you drank the vanilla, you drank the mouthwash, and now you can't take pills.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, isn't it?
It is funny, isn't it?
So a lot of people talk about, I'm sure you're familiar with Johann Hari and Chasing the Scream. A lot of people mention the piece in that where he says the opposite of addiction is not abstinence, the opposite of addiction is connection. And you're nodding your head because
I do know that. Yeah.
And I think it's so obvious instantly, but I think actually there's whole layers of depth in that. And one of those pieces around connection is not so much connection with other people. It's not even connection with yourself in terms of self-awareness, which I'm sure you'd agree is very important, but it's almost that connection with your body and being able to feel things again and to actually be able to feel the difference between a Hershey bar and a mango.
Yeah, well, because the drugs numb out. They get you flatlined. There's no high experiences. There's no low experiences. It's only flatlined.
Yeah. And I mean, I think back now over 20 and a bit years of drinking, and it was all very beige at the end of the day. It was all very the same. I mean, there are probably one or two amusing, interesting nights that I spent at university where I could probably recount a halfway decent story from. But for the most part, it was very boring. And I know if you'd have told me, if you'd have sort of asked me at the time, I'd have said, oh no, drinking is fun. It's people that don't drink that are boring. And that's one of the sadly underappreciated facts of life. That sobriety is much more fun.
It is. To be present, to be in your body. I think a lot of people numb their body. And we have also, as a society, wide brush. This isn't targeting anyone in specific, but we have abdicated our healthcare as a people to the medical care system, which isn't working.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the lessons I would love for people to realize, that what society tells us is that if we've got a problem, we need more. We need to add things. So if you're unhappy, just buy some stuff and you'll be happy. Get a bigger house and a bigger car, you'll be happy. And if you're ill, just get some pills, get some vitamins, get a load of pills, stick them in you, and you'll be absolutely fine. Whereas the truth, actually, subtraction is what you need. If you are unhappy, you'll probably do more for yourself if you remove the things in your life that are making you unhappy,
right,
rather than adding more stuff. And the same is true with your health, that actually removing things is what's going to give you better health, rather than adding stuff that doesn't really work in the first place anyway.
Doesn't really work in the first place anyway. Well, the last question as we're wrapping up here, I always ask people is, if you could go back, and I'm going to say in your particular case, go back to that young man who quit smoking that first year by reading this book. And thank you, by the way, on enlightening us on another way to get sober, because I know that people think that it's a one-stop shop. And that's one of the missions of this podcast, is to show that there's a whole range. It's a whole continuum. People that want to just try being sober, they're sober curious, to those that are like, no matter what, I'm not taking another drug, no matter what it is.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I make you so very right about that. I think that a lot of the recovery community is a bit like the martial arts world before MMA came along. You've got all of the karate people going on about how karate is the best martial art. All the boxers are going on about how boxing is the best martial art. And the thing is, well, it was Brazilian jiu-jitsu we found out was the best one. But the thing is, actually, the best fighting style is to pull in elements from everywhere, to take what works and abandon what does not.
And apply it to, that's right.
Yeah, and I think that is what we need to do as a recovery community. And until we do that, until we lose our dogmatic focus on a single technique, we will not properly serve people. We need to understand that the system always fails. It's not the individual is always right. We just need to get the system to work for them.
Right. So go
back totally
to that.
Not answering your question.
No, that's okay. So I'll segue back. So go roll us back down to that time before.
And what would I say to? What would I say
to yourself?
To myself. Well, the thing is, what I realized when I read that book was that there was an awful lot of power in it, that you could use it in a lot. It has flexibility as a system. You could use it to do a lot of other things. It's just a shame that I didn't use it to do a lot of other things. And at the time I was writing an awful lot, and I really wanted to become a professional writer. And it took me 20 years to become a professional writer, because I had to get sober first. And if I could perhaps persuade myself that it would be worth foregoing all of the alcohol and the drugs as an experiment, just for 6 months to see if my writing improved, then maybe I actually would. Maybe that would have been a hook that was strong enough to actually get me where I wanted to be. Though I rather suspect that me back then would think me today, Lincoln idiot.
I would probably agree with you. Myself, if I went back to my younger self, I don't know if I would believe me sitting across from me, because I would be an older person. And back then, like, you knew everything, right? You had the world by the tail. And
absolutely.
One thing I want to make perfectly clear to our audience is something that you've been talking about over and over, is just how many ways we can get sober. And that also, as a creative, you don't need a mood altering or mind changing substance to be your best creative self.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is almost in the question, isn't it? To create, you have to make stuff. And to make stuff, you need energy and focus. Yeah, that is what you need. And the sad truth about writing is it's actually pretty boring. It involves a lot of turning up. and doing the work. It involves almost no inspiration. It does not really require a muse. You just have to sit down and get on with it. And that is so much easier when you're not repeatedly poisoning yourself.
Right. I love your sense of humor, Duncan. You've just been a fantastic guest today. I want to thank you all for joining us on another power-filled episode of Recovery Comes Home Radio. We hope that the stories and insights shared today will be a beacon of hope, providing comfort, inspiration, and a sense of community. As we wrap up, remember that recovery is a continuous journey, one that is filled with both challenges and triumphs. You are not alone, and there is strength in every step forward. Before we part, a heartfelt thank you to Duncan, our guest, and this incredible audience for being part of the Recovery Comes Home family. If you or a loved one are in trouble, visit recoverycomeshome.com or call 561-945-7560. Until next time, stay strong, stay connected, and keep the flame of hope alive. This is Adrienne Tickey signing off. Thank you for tuning in to Recovery Comes Home Radio. We hope that today's episode has provided you with valuable information and insights on the recovery process. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Keep seeking support, practicing self-care, and moving forward one step at a time. Until next time, stay strong, stay resilient, and stay humble. Hope lives here.